defendant took away a 19-year-old young woman from this life. They took her from her mother, from her aunt, from her cousins.
Excuse me. I have no idea what's going on with the lighting here. I apologize.
No, that's fine. Your Honor, I think what gets lost, I think it's poignant that the victims in this case point out that their cousin, their niece, their daughter will someday be forgotten, and as Mr. Moore pointed out earlier, becomes essentially evidence in the form of a autopsy report stacked away in these walls. But what gets lost many times in these cases is not so much the 19 years that were taken away, but the many years of the future that were taken away. I've never found the appropriate words to quantify a victim's loss in these cases, and I think I can't do it any better than Mrs. Pham did in her own letter to this court. And perhaps it's because she's the one feeling the loss the most of her daughter that she is able to so brilliantly capture that loss. But she states, society has lost a beautiful, compassionate, ambitious young woman who would have lived a full life if it were not taken from her. My dreams of her finishing college, falling in love, getting married, and giving me grandchildren has all been taken from me. At the end of that paragraph, Your Honor, she states, I have a tombstone where I go to visit Vanessa, and all I can do is place fresh flowers and have a one-way conversation. And implicit in that, Your Honor, is the fact that she will never have a new conversation with her daughter. She will never be able to talk to her about her pending wedding, what flowers she may want at that wedding, help her pick a dress. Those are the moments that are lost because of this person, because of his greed, his malice, and his evil. Now the jury has set the cap for Your Honor at 49 years. I think certainly that will never give back the time that has been lost forever to this family, but it is a sentence that this court should impose. Justice, I submit, Your Honor, for the loss and for the evil that this defendant brought upon this community as well as this family and as well as Vanessa, dictate that this court impose the 49 years that the jury recommended. Despite the guidelines, Your Honor, the jury, this case is a case of its own. The jury heard everything in this case, gave due consideration, and I submit to Your Honor that the appropriate sentence in this case is to impose the 49 years that the jury recommended. Your Honor, I thank you for your patience as well as the jury's patience throughout and for your time and argument.
Thank you. Mr. Salvado?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, we do seek, in this case, a sentence within the guidelines. And in support thereof, we offer 4 relevant categories of sentencing factors which we feel you should consider. And first, I'm sure we ask the court should take note of how the defendant, through his attorneys, accepted full responsibility for his actions. And as a defense attorney, it's very difficult, and contrary to what the normal practice is, when a defense attorney stands up and within the first 10 minutes of speaking has to ask the jury to find his client guilty of a heinous crime. And that's exactly what we did. And we did that because of the mandate of our client. The fact that within the first 10 minutes, everyone knew he was accepting responsibility for taking Ms. Pham's life relieved a lot of pressure not only on Mr. Bernhardt and I, but as well as the Commonwealth. Because this case was not about who done it. That was determined from the onset of this trial. It was about the degree of culpability. Despite Mr. Julio Garcia's desire to take full responsibility, this is a court of justice, and Mr. Bernhardt and I would not have been doing our job if we didn't advocate for what we feel the evidence established, and that's murder in the second degree. Judge, this could have been a 2 to 3 week long trial. But because of our client's instruction, coupled with the absolute professionalism and respect that all counsel have for each other, this ended up being a trial as a model for efficiency. It's because Mr. Blanco Garcia did not throw any obstacles in the way of a just adjudication. And it was a fair adjudication. It was clear that in no way were we seeking to obstruct any of the, well, I believe maybe there was 1 or 2 objections to the over 120 exhibits that were admitted in trial. Judge, the court may have taken note of Mr. Blanco Garcia's demeanor and disposition throughout this entire trial. And despite the cameras being here, he didn't look back to try to gain any attention. He sat virtually motionless the entire time. And we submit that that's a sign that he understood the gravity of the consequences for his actions, which he admitted. He admitted through his attorneys, and he also admitted through the confession. The second factor, Your Honor, is does this man have any remorse? Does he have a conscience? Well, through that same confession, Your Honor, we know that after the murder, that he spiraled down into further abuse of drugs, including heroin. And this is also corroborated with the Commonwealth's evidence of the computer forensics that came in, which showed that he was searching for use of heroin, as well as information on the Pham case. But what's important to note, he was also looking for information on rehabilitation and rehab for drug abuse. Second, we learned that when we submit, it's a sign of conscience that he struggled with turning himself in, but did not do so because he didn't want to leave his family behind, specifically his child. But third, we submit that it is that conscience, Judge, that kept this case from becoming a cold case. It kept Mr. Blanco Garcia from leaving the country. It kept this case from ending up on a shelf for the next 50 to 60 years. A mystery. It is the same conscience, Your Honor, that, and I want to make this perfectly clear, it's the same conscience that after receiving a ticket to appear in court, a promise to appear, he was never arrested for petty larceny, a promise to appear, he still went to court, he completed community service hours, and submitted to fingerprints. It's the same conscience, Your Honor, that kept him in the same address the 7 months after submitting to the fingerprints, not running away, waiting for the police or the detectives to arrive. And as the police, as the detective state in the confession, he knew this day was coming. Judge, it's the same conscience that in the middle of his confession, he looks up and says, God will never forgive me. A man with no conscience does not utter those words. Judge, the third factor. Does this defendant have any value as a human being? Your Honor, he had no significant record before this. And as Mr. Bernhardt mentioned in his sentencing to the jury, since he's been incarcerated, Mr. Blanco has focused his attention or his energies on being a model inmate. And as rare as it is, and we heard this through the representative from the ADC, the Adult Detention Center, he hasn't been moved around from cell block to cell block because he virtually gets along with everyone. And you heard as recent as today with Mr. Gill that he continues to be polite and not a problem to authorities. And he is cooperative. He's done positive things in jail. He knows he's not getting out, Judge, anytime soon. He still, rather than sit with idle hands, got his GED. He's completed a substance abuse program. and done other self-betterment courses. I even believe one of them is financial planning. He knows the situation. But rather than sit by and fall into whatever culture is in the jail, he continues to do the only thing he can do that's positive in jail. Judge, proportionality. This is where the sentencing guidelines, the objective sentencing guidelines come in. Because as Mr. Lingen said, it is what the court uses to show or to sentence people who are similarly situated as this defendant. It is for this reason that the legislature has obligated the court to consider whether it's appropriate to suspend any portion of the jury recommendation. But before I address the argument for proportionality, I do want to address that Mr. Lingen does argue that this case is particularly heinous. Every homicide is heinous. By the mere definition of homicide, it's going to lead horrible consequences for everyone. That argument doesn't properly militate against proportionality. Mr. Lingen says the court should honor what the jury sentenced because they considered, and though we respectfully disagree with her finding of premeditation, we do understand that this jury thought about their sentence. But the jury spoke for the community, and the one thing that they did say loud and clear was that they wanted more information and support of proportionality. It was this jury who came back asking this court for information about what other people convicted of first-degree murder are sentenced to. That speaks volumes for the concept of proportionality. The court, and we all agree, could not provide that information, and they were left to guess. And that's what they did. They had to guess at a number. There's a couple of arguments that were rejected by the jury, Your Honor. One of which, when the Commonwealth stood up and said, life is the only just sentence. Life. The jury rejected that. It also rejected the notion that this case, that this murder, rejected the notion that PCP was not an important role in this, was not a catalyst. The jury accepted that. Why? Because that is what the evidence from the Commonwealth showed. The Commonwealth did not have evidence that this was motivated by greed, did not have evidence that this was motivated for the desire to rob, did not have evidence that this was motivated for the desire to rape. It established that this case involved PCP. The jury accepted that, the finders of fact. Because I submit to the court, had they not accepted that, they would have come back with a life sentence. Your Honor, the sentencing guidelines take into consideration not just individuals who are under the influence, and Mr. Lingen's right, the voluntary influence of drugs. Those same guidelines take into consideration those who are convicted of first-degree murder after they spend days, weeks, months, even years planning to kill someone, and years planning on the cover-up. It covers people who hide victims. You know, that is not the case in this case. It's horrible, we understand. And by no means are we suggesting that Mr. Blanco is in any way a hero. That was one thing that was brought up to the jury. We are only suggesting that he has a conscience. He has taken responsibility. The guidelines, Your Honor, from 23 to 38 years and 4 months take into consideration all these cases of first-degree murder. In summation, Judge, Mr. Blanco Garcia has taken responsibility. He did so from the outset of this trial. He does have a conscience, we submit to you. He has some value as a human being, and we feel that the sentence should be suspended because the concept of proportionality justifies it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the Commonwealth?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Garcia, if you please stand. Mr. Garcia, is there anything that you want to say before I sentence you? Go ahead, sir.
I would like to say to Ms. Pham's family and friends that I'm deeply sorry for what I did, and that I hope that my punishment will help them in their grieving process.
And Mr. Garcia, I've given a lot of consideration to this case, and I think that the jury sentence was appropriate. I'm going to sentence you to 49 years of incarceration and also 3 years of post-release supervision. So when you are released, it will be into an intensive supervision situation. You have the right to appeal the decision of the court. If you'd like to appeal it, you must note your appeal within 30 days, unless you tell me otherwise. We say if you can't afford an attorney to represent you in an appeal, I will appoint an attorney to represent you. The Commonwealth of Virginia will pay for that. Unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to appoint your trial counsel to represent you, Mr. Bernhardt and Mr. Salvato, in any appeal that you might want to file. I think they've done an excellent job of representing you to date. Are there any questions about the sentence?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Garcia, you're remanded to the custody of the sheriff.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. The court will be in recess for 15 minutes.
All right.
Are you going to be here? I don't know if I will be, because I